Welcome to the UX Research Rundown podcast. My name is Henrik. I am the CEO of Lookback, and I am your host for this podcast series that we're making. And in this series, I'm going to get to talk to a lot of very cool researchers who've had very illustrious careers across a bunch of different companies, small and large. And we will be talking about my favorite, well, I shouldn't call it my favorite problem, but the problem that I think is the most important and yet to be solved problem facing our industry and community. Namely, how do you get the non-researcher part of your teams to engage with the research that you're doing so that they can actually go and build better experiences? And with me today, I have Victoria Sosik, who has had a career mostly, I think, at Google, 6 years almost. But she's currently the director of UX research at Verizon. So thanks for being here. Looking forward to talking to you.
Hello, happy to be here.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking about team engagement or whatever you want to call it. But I'd like to start with kind of getting a bit of your origin story coming into research. And the reason I always ask this question is because I think a lot of our field is very young. We're also obviously still young, but everything is relative. So there's a lot of people coming into research recently, which is a good thing. The field has grown. But I know that a common question is among people coming in is, do I belong here? Do I have the right background? Will I succeed? And when I talk to people who've been here a while, they come from all sorts of places and backgrounds and stuff like that. So I'd love to hear those stories and kind of get that. So could you please start with your origin story, please?
Yeah, of course. I think I'm actually going to give a preface to it and say that looking back, the origin story that I tell has a very seemingly clear narrative. But I think the one thing I want to just mention is that while I was living it, it did not seem clear at all. So, it started out with me. Really, it was a checkbox on my undergrad application. I happened to check this one box of a program at this one school that looked kind of interesting. It wasn't what I was thinking I would study anywhere else, but it sounded cool there. I checked that box. I ended up going to that school, and that really kind of set me on the path to study what started out as computer and cognitive science. Then I added in psychology. Then I added in fine arts, which led me to a grad degree in human-computer interaction, and then interning at a couple companies, including Google, and then going full-time as a UX researcher there. And then, and the story continues from there. But I think the thing is that at each stage, I really didn't know why I was where I was or how to kind of make sense of it, because nothing felt quite right for a while. That's what kind of led me to keep exploring, like, what was tangential to where I was, what are areas I could kind of flex into, and adjacencies that I could kind of pull into my education to then kind of come to something that felt right. And I think that's where I finally got when I was in grad school studying HCI, and then I kind of found that final block, missing a puzzle piece when I was doing my industry internships and realized that that's where I wanted to be. So again, I feel like I have a relatively straightforward path, given that I studied HCI, which tends to lead relatively smoothly. But yeah, at the time, it didn't quite make sense. I didn't realize where the narrative was going to go. So.
Right. So was there a moment where you realized, like, oh, I actually have the background for this, or like this is who I am, or do you remember when that switched?
Well, I think there's probably several moments of that, throughout, but I think the first one was when I was talking to my undergrad advisor and just even learned that HCI was a thing, right? Because I was in this computer science program, a relatively traditional computer science program, and knew that that was not the right thing. But I didn't want to completely give up that technical CS side that I did, like to some extent. And he helped to kind of show me, fields that were similar, but maybe a little bit more multidisciplinary that I could pull into my other interests. So that was probably the first, sticking point. And then another was definitely, I think, when I did my internships and kind of felt what it was like to be putting a lot of those ideas into practice and actually driving some impact with them.
Right.
So that's where I was like, I think, no, I don't want to go the academic route. This is what I want to do. And that's what I did.
Cool. Awesome. So what would be like it sounds to me like what you did was you tried out a bunch of things, internships, and kind of felt what felt right and went with that, even if you didn't really understand it at the time. Is that right? And like, how looking back at that, what would you have told like the very newbie version of yourself as you were going through this? Because you must have had doubts too, you know, like, well, where am
Mhm.
I going? And could you share some insight into that, please?
Yeah, I think it really is like there is a path for you, right? Because I felt very out of place early on in computer science. Even though, again, I could do the work and, I liked coding, I felt, yeah, just I definitely felt it was not the right place for me. And I think just keep pushing, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and don't feel like you need to completely give up on something. If you like it, you can just kind of push the boundaries and see what may exist, slightly outside of it, that may feel like a better fit.
Right. Oh, cool. Awesome. Okay, so moving on to the kind of main theme of the podcast.
Yeah.
So I have this observation that I made, and I'd like to kind of get your view on that because we all sit in our own perspectives. You know, I have
Mhm.
this. I have this. One of the privileges of my job is that I get to do research on researchers. I talk to researchers all day, so I'm probably one of the people in the world that have talked to the most researchers. You know, so that's super interesting. But it's hard to know kind of what people have very different experiences. So here's what I observe. Um, Research has our field has really evolved in a very positive direction over the last, I would say, 5 or 6 or 7 years or something like that. So people have a seat at the table. Like research is a thing now. It's not just something like, oh, we need to research. You know, it's like, but it's it's unequally distributed. And the same thing goes for this problem that we're discussing today. Is my observation. So you have some companies where there's great team engagement. It's obvious to like developers and designers, etc., to show up in research sessions and partake in that and be very engaged. And at the same time, you have a lot of teams of one or whatever where perhaps they've never had the feeling that someone really cares about what they're doing. That's also kind of a narrative um,
Mhm.
that I hear. So what has your experience been? And I know you've been at large companies, but we talked earlier about Google being like really a bunch of very small companies kind of disconnected.
Mhm.
So what has your experience been, and have you seen some changes in this, and kind of where do you think this is going, and etc.
Yeah, definitely seen a lot of change in that. I think the other nuance I'll even just add to what you just mentioned is within companies, you see
Mm,
that same spectrum
mm,
in many times, especially the larger companies, right? That I've mostly spent my career at. I know, well, I spent my entire time in one area at Google. I know from research colleagues had very different experiences, and right now I'm in the position where I oversee a central research team that works with a lot of different business units, a lot of different teams within Verizon, and I see the same differences between some of the experiences that my team members are having, just based on again, like how mature the practice is in different
mm,
teams, how used to working with UX research that different team members are, and it's kind of cool to be able to track the trajectories, right, as they're happening even within the same company, and just kind of seeing the progress that we're able to make there. Um, I did a lot of what my goals have been. I think a lot of what my role is helping to facilitate that for my team members and helping to um, educate feels so like I'm sitting on top of the tower educating you, but to help to show the value and
mm.
help to really advocate for how research can help everyone achieve their goals.
Right. That's a super interesting perspective that I kind of missed in my thinking about it. That, of course, there isn't like one research culture per company. There are many research
Yeah.
cultures even within companies. So that's a super interesting point. And the old social scientist in me immediately thinks that this is a great experiment environment, right? Because you can kind of like test different things. So, what would you say distinguishes the two? Let's say you have like a group where this works really well. In the same company, because then we can hold that setting like the experiment is clear, right? So what difference within the same company, a group where this works and a group where this doesn't work?
I think there can be so many different answers to that, right? I think on one hand, it can be leadership attitudes to research and how accustomed the most senior leaders are to working with, and how open and kind of how much they bought into the idea of research being a core partner and a really important part of the overall team. I think the researchers themselves, right? And how much they see it upon themselves to really be that partner and see it as their role to, in some ways, insert themselves and continue to kind of
Mm,
push for more and more collaboration across different phases of projects. Um, I think there's resource allocations, right? So resources look different as far as how both in how many researchers, how much budget you have, things like that, that obviously impact how much work you can do. And to some extent, the more resources and the more ability you have to do your best work, the more likely you are to be able to show the value of the research. So those are a couple different things that I think can impact how
mm,
well positioned a researcher is.
right. And how much of this is, I mean, you can ignore my questions and just like keep talking about your experiences if this doesn't make sense. But how much of this is kind of organic? Like one thing we see in our data, for example, is that if people sit in on sessions live, they get kind of hooked. They see their first like moderated usability test, and they see the participants struggling with the thing that they built, and they're like, "Oh, wow, that's because they care." Like everyone cares about everyone building product cares about the user experience. They might not care about like reading every user research report, but they care about the experience, right?
Yeah.
And you also see the moderator. I mean, this is something I observe very often, that the value, people who have sat in and observed researchers doing their thing are kind of value research more, because they're like, oh wow, this is like hard, this is an art almost, this is a skill. That's kind of organic. And then you also hear these stories that you kind of alluded to a little bit, like, and I'm sure in your research leadership role, you've probably come across it, where you kind of have to, convince or educate or sell even perhaps, or like stakeholder management.
Yeah.
How much do these go hand in hand? How much is, how do these relate to each other in your experience?
Yeah, I think it's 100% true. When people see and feel the customer, the user, it definitely hits in a different way. I think that can be a really powerful way to expose some people to research who haven't before. I think though that only goes part of the way, because I think very few people, even those who are not super bought into research and who haven't been exposed, don't want to, understand the user, the customer, don't want to help them, right? That is
Mm,
still something that I'd say is true for a good chunk of people we work with. I think where I often find a lot of value is by taking the lens of what's standing in their way. Why are they
mm,
not? And oftentimes it's things like, what are they incentivized by, right? What are their metrics they're trying to hit? um, what time pressures are they under? Things that could be actively, working against the inclusion of more people, more, activities in the timeline, things like that. And if it's not clear to them how these activities are going to actually influence their bottom line, what they're measured by, then it's a hard sell, even if they as people, right, believe
mm,
in the value of talking to people and understanding them. So I think it's really important to understand what your stakeholders are incentivized by, what they're being measured, what they care about,
mm.
because I think oftentimes those are the things that are standing in the way from us becoming, even a closer collaborator, a stronger partner to different stakeholders.
Right, right. So, in your role as director of UX research, how much of this kind of whatever you want to call that thing, the stakeholder understanding, navigating this landscape, trying to have impact, um, how much of your job is focused on that? If that is even in your job description, so to speak.
Most of it, I'd
Most of
say,
it.
right? It's understanding that, understanding where we need the research, helping to resource it and figure out how to balance the resources we have, at a level that aligns to Verizon's highest priorities. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So, but so how much is um, one thing I've been thinking about with this, and I think the reason why it works so well, when I see this working, when there's a lot of engagement and collaboration around not just user experience, because you can access that in different ways, but like really the research, and kind of sitting in on sessions or whatever forms it takes, like showing up at research share outs,
Mhm.
contributing questions or whatever, right? Um, how much of that is, when that works, my experience is that everyone gets very empowered by that. Like, it's obviously fun for researchers because your job matters, and all of those hours you put
Hmm.
into having the interviews and whatever, that counts. And you see the result. I think that's motivating for everyone. But it also really does something super positive with engineers and people developing the product, and the product managers and everything, because they get to see this very close connection. Because otherwise they can just sit somewhere in like a lab and like build product and ship it, and someone gets angry on Twitter, but they don't really know what's going on behind it. So, like, how much is that a shared responsibility? And I mean, the obvious answer is like, yes, it's shared. But I mean, like, in practice, how much of that do you have to carry in your research leadership role? And like, what's your thought about all of that?
Yeah, I think it's certainly true that there's a level of like detachment that you can have if you're not seeing it with your own eyes, right? And it's easier
Mm,
perhaps to ignore or to kind of say like that's not the most important thing. Um, and that it's harder to do that when you're, observing people, when you're talking to them. Um, it's interesting though because I think that in my mind that's actually a few steps down the line. Like that in of itself isn't really what's going to cross some of the biggest hurdles to
mm,
getting the strongest research partnerships and the strongest embedded relationships and the buy-in, because I think that can be a catalyst, that can be a spark. But even after people do that, I think if you don't address those bigger issues, that can
mm.
fade, or they do it once, but that's not enough for sustained engagement, right?
It's just
And
a beautiful memory of something we did
e-
once, and yeah.
exactly. And I think if you the observation of sessions and the talking to users is kind of both a tool to drive engagement, but also an outcome in a way. If you get to the point where
Mm,
they're doing that regularly, that's I think when that it's a strong signal that people are finding it valuable to spend their own time, which is oftentimes our most constrained resource is our time,
yeah.
to actually engage in sessions in that way. So it's again, I think it comes down to best understanding what the barriers are, and if it's truly not believing that that this type of data, that doing this kind of work is important, then I think that goes a huge long way. If there's other organizational structural constraints, I don't think that's necessarily enough to push it over the hurdle.
Yeah.
But it's a
I
part of
love
it.
this. Yeah. No, but I love this because for me, as we said, I think before we we pressed record here, we were talking a little bit about how my approach over the years to this has been to solve it from a tooling perspective, right? But that's just one perspective. So I realized that I come
Right.
in with this like confirmation bias that is like, if we just get everyone into the session, it's going to be fine. But I think you raise a very valid point, and I mean that's why I want to talk to a bunch of researchers in the uh, that have worked with this across all levels, and other leaders too, and in the company, uh, because I realized that it's other things too. But what really interests me is like when you're coming in as someone who is perhaps building out the research practice. We have a lot of team of ones that are doing this, and they're
Hmm.
trying to kind of get their organization from a place where they're just doing everything, and perhaps they just have one stakeholder that they're like reporting to or everything, and they're trying to build this up. Um, like, is there a recipe for this? Like, what has been your experience, and like what do you address first? Because like obviously like this is a necessary but not sufficient condition, or whatever it's called, right? And then like
Yeah.
is there like a method to this madness to kind of start building it out, or what's your view on that?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. I think, and I'm not sure if this 100% answers your question, but it's what comes to mind. I think as researchers, especially when you mentioned the team of one, as researchers, we
Mm,
try to do everything. We don't like to say no, and we like to help. We want to help as many people as possible. It's in our nature. And I think oftentimes, though, that doesn't set us up to do our best work, do our deepest work, to do our most impactful work. And I think the way that you're really showing the value is by doing those deeper, really impactful projects that by out of necessity require you to focus. So
mm,
I think it's not a recipe, but I'd say a really important approach can be to not try to do it all, but to identify, what is a project that has all of the signals or all the makings of a really impactful one.
Mm,
It's one that leadership cares about. It's one that has unknowns that research is well poised to solve. Maybe it
mm,
has opportunity for strategic um, development. It's not already well defined for one reason or another. So, kind of finding something that fits that, and really partnering closely on that to show instead of trying to tell the value of research, because we could always there's so many potential things we could do that I think being able to
mm,
identify what has the makings of impact is a really important skill, especially as you become a more senior researcher, and then being able to use that to kind of create your own case studies, right? And then as you start kind of getting a couple of those case studies under your belt, that's where I've seen the the ability to scale really take off, because then stakeholders start talking, then you have examples that you can point to when you need to make cases for resources, right? If you're trying to either grow a team or get more money, right? It's hard to do that without having a couple really, really solid, impactful cases. And when I say impact, I'm also talking about tying to business metrics.
mm,
We I think sometimes in UX, and we're getting better, but sometimes we still are a bit too afraid of making claims around how our work has really directly driven metrics that our company
mm,
at large cares about. And if we can do that, that's, I think, when we show the value. And then when we can start leveraging that to try to continue to grow and to try to, meet with new people, new stakeholders, and just as a function, you become larger and more impactful and more, um, you know, more sizable at a company.
oh, so many questions come out of that. Thank you. So I'll start with, I mean, I think all of that makes a lot of sense, as someone who's kind of working with people to, try to pick the right people for the right job and everything. Like, I hear you talk about this and I'm like, yes, of course she has this career because of course you've been successful, right? So great. But for someone starting out, or I have, first of all, this sounds like a very long process. Like, how
Yes.
how long should one expect to kind of spend on trying to go from the starting point of this to where, like, the situation that you're describing now, where you've gathered all of these case studies and you're able to use them and everything? Like, what's kind of is this a 7-year thing or a 2-year thing, or is it a 6-month thing, or what is it?
I mean, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head by saying it's a very long process.
Mm,
I think I mean, I will say I think it's very hard to be a team of one as a junior researcher. I think it's
mm,
because you don't have, some of the support to help guide you through all those processes that, I just kind of spoke briefly to.
mm,
Um, so it's actually one of the reasons that I think for researchers, it's important to have a sense of what aspect of the role do we enjoy most, and what kind of role do we want to be in? Do we want to be in a role where we are having to forge that way and build that? Do we want to
mm,
be in a more established researcher role where we can do the research, work closely with team members, drive impact, but don't have to continually be pushing and fighting? And because coming back to the very beginning of our conversation, there's research roles on that spectrum.
mm,
And I think being being very aware of what taking a role on a different side of that spectrum could mean for your day to day. Because if you're, I mean, all the more power to anyone who's in this position. But if you're a junior researcher trying to really forge out on your own, yeah, I think it's a long process because it's hard, right?
mm,
I mean, I've been able to make some of this progress in my role at Verizon the past 3 years, but I came in already having many, many years of research experience and
mm,
learning from those more senior than me. And I think that's how I was able to level up the way that I did. Is I observed those around me. I took in the way they were managing and negotiating, and really tried to model my work after theirs in many way. And I think that's really hard to do. I don't think I'd be able to come in and do what I'm doing now in my current role had I not had that experience.
yeah.
So
Oh, totally. So, and that's great because that's a perfect segue to my other question I had. So, who are these allies that kind of that you? Because what I see here is something that's been an interesting. I've heard in other conversations that I've had about this too. Just like, part of this is you are applying your research skills, I would argue, to the internal organization. So you're kind of
Yes.
researching your organization and you're navigating that just like you would understand the user experience. You're kind of like, how are my stakeholders experiencing research, and how, what do I need to do? So that's something that everyone can apply as their research skills grow.
Yeah.
But part of it also is this kind of, when did you realize this, right? Like, do you have any memories of that, where you kind of started figuring some of this out? And who were your allies in that? If you, and I don't mean like, you can mention names if you want, but I mean like more like the function. Was this like senior researcher? Was this other people, or?
Yeah, I mean, I very clearly remember one moment where I just started full time at Google. So I interned there for 3 months, but the intern experience, is different in many ways from joining full time. And I joined full time in a remote location, so I was not seated near any other researchers in my team. And I was just like, what the heck am I doing? Like, how do I get anything done? Like, I don't like, I'm like, I know how to do research. I just finished a PhD. I know how to do research, but how do I actually get anything done here? And I think that's when I was like, just really owning the fact that I do not at all know how to get anything done here. So I'm going to have to learn that aspect of the role. Like, that is a gap from my training. And in that role, I was fortunate to have a solid team of UX researchers and many more senior than me, including my manager. And a lot of it was just trying to, like, I would try to partner on projects with my manager. I would try to observe them and watch them in meetings, kind of observe what kinds of emails are they sending, how are they driving conversations, how are they executing, how are they going from here's a research project that we can maybe contribute to actually shaping that project, asking the right questions, how are they communicating those findings? Like, all those things were things that I just watched my primarily manager, but a few other senior researchers as well. And I had product allies along the way for sure. I don't want to sell them short, but primarily it was really by just seeing someone that was successful doing things the way I wanted to be able to do them and observing that person.
Researching, perfect.
Yep.
So okay, great. So we reached that part of the conversation in this short podcast format where I'm going to have to round off, unfortunately. My feeling in all of these, and I recommend everyone to listen to all the other ones we've done, is that there's so much to talk about here, and it's been such a pleasure to have you. But I'd like to finish on one kind of question about handling this journey, and kind of like, because when we look back, when I talk to people who've had success and worked through this and learned these things and like apply them and have a track record, everything is easier once you reach that point. I mean, it's still hard, but like, you have the track record, you recognize the situations and you're not lost in it, right? But the road to getting there, and I'm sure you will agree, is full of like moments where like, I'm just going to give up. And when I talk to people, I feel they're like, your story sounds very hopeful. It's like, and I tried this and then it didn't work. And and I think that's important to maintain that. But I also hear a lot of hopelessness out there where it's like, no one's ever going to care about my work, or like, I try, but no one is interested, et cetera, et cetera. So is that something that you recognize? Is that something as a research leader that you work with your junior researchers? And what would be some advice, to people in the audience who might be feeling these kind of feelings that, this is never going to work, because as you said, it's a long process, etc., and it's difficult. Like, what are some words of guidance?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. It's always funny to hear you characterize my journey in your words, because of course it didn't always feel straight upward like that, right? The things that didn't explicitly call out before were the moments of feeling like, what's the point? Why are we doing this? This person over here is never going to see the value, so why even try, right? Like, I think I've certainly had several of those moments, and I think the way that you approach them, you kind of have to look in a little bit and say, where am I right now? Am I in a position where I'm feeling confident enough that I can take on those challenges? Or do I need to be like, no, I'm actually kind of feeling a bit burned out myself, and I just need to maybe take the foot off the gas for a little bit and be okay with that. Just kind of let things go, let some of those, moments that can feel like failure moments just happen, and kind of recharge myself so I can get back to the point where I'm feeling like I can take it on again. So I think oftentimes it really is just acknowledging, like, where am I and how well positioned am I feeling, just like personally, emotionally, whatever it may be, to take on those challenges right now? And if the answer is I'm not, that's okay. And you can
Mm.
chill for a little bit and things will still be fine.
Lovely. What a perfect way to round this up. Thank you so much for being with us. If you have any, do you have any presence on social media? If people, are you open to people reaching out if they have questions, etc.?
Yeah, happy to feel free to find me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I don't always respond instantly, but I try to get back within a few days.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation and learned as much as I did. So if you want more of this, you can sign up for our newsletter where we publish new releases, etc. The UX Research Rundown. And tune in for more podcasts like this one. Thank you very much and happy researching. Bye.
Thanks.